Right. Let's set the scene. It's the late 19th century, and the world map is aggressively being carved up by European empires. These powers were absolutely convinced that their industrial, military might made them completely invincible. Well, today, in this explainer, we are unpacking the incredible story of how that exact world order was completely shattered. We're diving into the First Italo-Ethiopian War, focusing in on the legendary Battle of Adwa. This isn't just a military history lesson. It's an epic story about how brilliant leadership, profound national unity, and absolute tactical genius fundamentally upended the globe.
So you really have to put yourself in that late 1800s mindset. The major European powers are gobbling up territory, honestly believing their modern tech makes them unbeatable. And then comes the staggering, reality-bending day of March 1, 1896. In literally a single day, an African nation absolutely annihilated a modern, industrialized European army. We are not talking about a minor skirmish here. This was a decisive, earth-shattering victory that sent shockwaves across the entire planet. How exactly did an uncolonized empire stop a heavily armed superpower cold? Let's get into it.
Okay, to really grasp how this went down, we have to look at the geography. Italy was actually a newly unified nation itself back in 1861, and they were desperate. I mean, really desperate to prove their might and grab colonies, just like Britain and France were doing. So they established a foothold on the western shore of the Red Sea, taking over the critical port of Massawa in 1885. And from there, they start pushing inland. They're moving up into the high, incredibly rugged mountains and fertile valleys of the Horn of Africa, pushing right up against the borders of the Ethiopian Empire. Now, the Italians weren't just popping in for a friendly visit. They were building permanent forts, dragging in heavy artillery, and aggressively embedding themselves in this incredibly harsh, unforgiving terrain. Naturally, tensions spiked immediately. And the Ethiopian warriors, they made it crystal clear that they were not about to just hand over their ancestral land. In fact, in 1887, at the Battle of Dogali, an Ethiopian commander named Ras Elula ambushed an Italian relief column, cutting down hundreds of troops. That was a massive wake-up call. The Italians quickly realized standard colonial intimidation was absolutely not going to work here.
But you know how empires operate, right? They usually try to win with a pen before they bring out the swords. In 1889, the Italians and the newly crowned Emperor Menelik II signed what's known as the Treaty of Ucciale. But there was a massive, incredibly deceitful catch. Article 17 of this treaty was intentionally mistranslated. The Italian version claimed that Italy effectively controlled Ethiopia's foreign affairs, basically making it an Italian protectorate. But the Amharic version, it simply stated that Emperor Menelik could choose to use Italian diplomats, if he wanted to. When Menelik realized the trick, he was furious. He fiercely renounced the treaty in 1893, and right then and there, the spark for all-out war was officially lit. So what does Menelik do next? He definitely doesn't just sit around waiting to be invaded. He brilliantly uses this impending existential threat as a catalyst to completely build out his state's bureaucracy and military power. We're talking streamlined, centralized taxation, which allowed him to stockpile mountains of food and supplies for a massive standing army. He ordered extensive geographical surveys to boost revenue. And most importantly, this is crucial, he didn't just rely on traditional spears and shields. He leveraged diplomacy and trade to aggressively acquire tens of thousands of modern European breech-loading rifles. Now, what's really fascinating here is the visual contrast out on the field. You've got Emperor Menelik II and his high command draped in these magnificent lion's mane headdresses, elaborately embroidered silk robes carrying traditional shields. But look closer. In their hands, they are holding modern bolt-action rifles. The Italians entirely, fatally underestimated their enemy. They took one look at that traditional Ethiopian attire and wrongly, arrogantly assumed it meant these warriors couldn't possibly comprehend or use modern military technology. And wow, that arrogance would cost them dearly. You have to appreciate the sheer logistical brilliance of the Ethiopian response here. It was practically unprecedented. Menelik II calls for total national mobilization. And when you look at the raw numbers drawn from historically competing and sometimes actively warring provinces like Shewa, Amhara, Tigray, and Gojam, it's mind-blowing. They assembled an astonishing 145,000 men. Over 70,000 of them were equipped with firearms, and 28,000 had those modern breech loaders. Pulling off this kind of rapid, highly unified military assembly across such vast, mountainous terrain, it's literally a masterclass in leadership. And keep in mind, this wasn't just your standard military draft. This was a total, all-in national effort. The threat of invasion basically forged a unified identity that completely transcended social class, geographic region, and religion. You had farmers, pastoralists, local chiefs, and seasoned veterans from vastly diverse ethnic groups, the Amhara, Aroma, Tigrayan, Garaje, you name it, all standing shoulder to shoulder. The Italians really thought they could just stroll in and exploit internal tribal divisions. Instead, their invasion was the exact thing that glued the Ethiopian people together into an unbreakable wall. We also absolutely have to talk about the spiritual dimension of this unity. Emperor Menelik II was incredibly strategic. He framed the resistance not just as a political defense, but as a divine, sacred mission. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church played a huge role here, massively fortifying the soldiers' morale. Clergy literally marched right alongside the troops. They carried the tabot, which are replicas of the Ark of the Covenant, directly out to the front lines. Imagine the psychological impact of that. It gave the warriors a profound sense of divine protection and an unshakable spiritual cohesion. But hey, wars aren't just won by men with guns and faith, right? They are won by logistics. And enter Empress Tai-Tu Batul, who was a total tactical genius in her own right. She mobilized an incredible 10,000 women to support the war effort, and these women weren't just in the background. They rallied demoralized soldiers, provided critical battlefield logistics, and, get this, weeks before Adwa, the Empress orchestrated a siege that purposefully starved the Italian troops of their water supply. So while the Ethiopians remained hydrated and fed, the Italians were left desperate, incredibly thirsty, and completely exhausted. Which brings us right to the eve of the battle, and to the man commanding the Italian forces, General Oresti Baratieri. The guy is sweating. He's under immense, crushing political pressure from Rome to deliver a quick, glorious victory. But he's facing dwindling supplies, a literally starving army, and the very real threat of personal political ruin. So on February 29, 1896, a desperate Baratieri makes a fateful, entirely disastrous decision. He orders his troops to advance through pitch-black, unmapped, incredibly treacherous mountain passes at night, hoping to somehow surprise the Ethiopians. As dawn breaks on March 1, 1896, it is absolute chaos for the invaders. The scattered, totally exhausted, and completely disoriented Italian columns stumble blindly right into the waiting Ethiopian army. Because the Ethiopians intimately knew every inch of that rugged terrain, they rapidly encircled the Italian positions. It turned into intense, brutal, close-quarters combat. Ethiopia's massive numerical superiority, combined with their fierce traditional combat tactics and coordinated modern rifle fire, simply overwhelmed the technologically advanced but completely outmaneuvered Italian forces. The aftermath was decisive and frankly devastating for Italy. Their army was totally crushed. We're talking approximately 7,000 Italian soldiers dead, with high-ranking officers, including General da Barmida, killed right there in action. The Ethiopian forces forced Italy into an absolute unconditional surrender. And this singular event, it completely, utterly shattered that deeply held European myth of colonial invincibility. For the very first time in modern history, a fully equipped, modern European colonial power was decisively defeated by an African army. No excuses, no caveats. Just defeated. The legacy of Adwa, though, went way, way beyond Ethiopia's borders. Even the London Times had to admit that Menelik's victory was the victory of all Africa. It sent shockwaves across the globe. It became this glowing, powerful beacon for Pan-Africanism, Black liberation, and anti-colonial movements everywhere, from the African continent all the way to the Americas. Leaders like Marcus Garvey looked directly to Ethiopia as the ultimate symbol of Black freedom and unyielding resilience. It proved, once and for all, that profound unity and strategic brilliance could overcome seemingly insurmountable imperial power. So, what does this all mean for us today? The heroes of Adwa didn't just win a military battle against an empire, they won a massive battle against their own internal divisions. They proved that when people put aside their differences and unite for a shared, higher purpose, they can achieve the absolutely impossible. So here's my call to action for you. Carry this blueprint of unity forward. Look at the fractures and polarization in our own modern communities and ask yourself, how can we bridge those gaps? History isn't just a bunch of dates we study. It's a tool we use to build a better future. Let the incredible legacy of Adwa inspire you today. Until next time, keep learning and keep questioning.